Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have a special show for us. We have Catherine Rehies-Boyd joining us from Western States Petroleum. Kath, thanks for joining us and welcome to the program. How's it going?
It's going great. So thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. It's been, I guess, like an interesting few years. With energy. This desire to get to kind of 100% renewable energy. But kind of 2020 took a different shift. Maybe it was a break for you, but I didn't really notice a lot going on in the energy space. Can you kind of, give us a recap on how 2020 went for you and your association?
Yeah, I sure can, Jared. I mean, it was a rough year, as you know. I mean, we started out with difficulty in demand destruction, certainly from the pandemic itself. And what that basically means is, people aren't moving, they're not driving, they're not flying, and as you know, we produce transportation fuels
Right.
for all of the state and the five states in which we operate. So it was a tough time from that perspective. And on top of that, you had a drop in the crude oil prices as well. So we represent both producers and refiners. So both sides of the business were hit simultaneously. And what I'm proud of is that during the pandemic, and if there's any word for our industry that comes to mind during it, is just committed. We were very much essential services from day one. And I was just so proud of how quickly we rallied and were able to still provide all of the energy that the state needed during that difficult time with literally no hiccups. And I think that's just a testament to the commitment of this industry to this state and the other states that we operate.
Yeah, 2020 was, I guess, a unique year. We had a number of disastrous things happen, but kind of one thing that happened kind of in the peak of the summer with fires raging and we were all kept inside was we had these kind of rolling blackouts going on. And kind of there was a lot of finger pointing going on back and forth. Kind of, I guess, what's your take on the energy supply here in California? And kind of, are we doing things right? And do we have enough energy, producing to kind of help us through these, new demands in energy?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jared. And I think you're asking the exact right questions, right? Because it's complicated. There's nothing that's simple about the energy space. And as I always say, there's not a single source of energy that doesn't have issues, right? So our traditional oil and gas has issues, solar has issues, wind has issues, electricity has issues. It's just about how do you find the right balance of what we call an all of the above energy strategy, so that you make sure you can provide adequate, reliable, affordable fuels and energy to the people that need it, as I say, everywhere all the time. And what happened in this state is our planning wasn't the best. I mean, we could have avoided some of that unintended consequences of rolling blackouts if we had not taken off the grid the backup of natural gas. We were a little premature in that decision to only go towards renewables to supply electricity to the grid. And it's always good, as we all know, is to have a plan B, right? You
Right.
always need a plan B. And in that case, we found ourselves short. And we're not there yet with the storage capacity that we need on the electricity side, on the storage side, on the renewable side, to only rely on that 100%. And as you know, everyone knows, the wind only blows certain times, the sun only shines certain times. So until we crack that nut of storage, it's going to be a challenge for us. And so we're very interested in making sure we look at all of the energy sources out there and what's that right balance that finds the economic progress, the environmental protections, and making sure we have, again, affordable, reliable fuel and energy for people who need it throughout the state. And I think it's I always say when people wake up every day, right, they expect three things to happen. Hopefully we all wake up every day, but we expect three things to happen. In COVID, we don't know, right? No, we expect three things to happen. And that is, we want to turn our lights on, we want to heat and cool our homes, and we want to drive to A to B. And we want to do that affordably and reliably and safely. And if we don't do those three things, all of the other things become a little less relevant. And so it's really important that we get this right and that we do it, as I say, with everybody at the table, because it is going to take our collective wisdom on this one. because no one has the corner on wisdom on how we're going to get to the pretty aggressive goals that California has, meritorious as they may be, very aggressive, probably the most aggressive in frankly, the world. And so to get where this state wants to go, we've got to look at the facts and the science. One thing I learned early on in my career, that facts and science absolutely matter. They still matter as you plan these paths forward.
A lot has been talked about, the pandemic and how about people are staying home, working from home. People aren't driving as much as kind of you alluded to earlier. I guess, have you gauged, how many less miles driven this year people in California drove less? Or do you guys have any quantitative measure about, how many, how much less driving is occurring this year than normal?
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers. I can get them for you, but it's been significant. It is picking up, but still, as we have the surges and the shutdowns again, then you see that cycle continue. Gasoline hit pretty hard. Diesel, not as much because you're still moving goods and services out of the ports to places all over this state and other states that you need it. So it hasn't taken as hard a hit, but the real hard hit was also jet. Just nobody's flying
Right.
anywhere. And so those are, there definitely has been a downturn. We're seeing a little bit of pickup in demand, but not anywhere to the levels that it was prior to the pandemic.
It was in October or November, Gavin Newsom came out with an executive order, detailing about, the internal combustion engine no longer being part of California's future. And this year, he came out with an ambitious, $1.5 billion, I believe, in electric car refueling stations. In your opinion, how feasible is an electric future for electric cars here in California? And, are there alternative fuels or other things you guys are working on kind of in this transportation space that should also be included in this conversation?
Oh, thank you. God, you have great questions. That must be why you do this. Yeah. So it's a, the governor's executive order was interesting because even as the media now reports on it, they don't necessarily get it right. Nobody's taken away anyone's cars. What he said was, in 2035, we will quit selling internal combustion engines. But when you think about that and you peel that onion back, there's, I think, close to 40 million people in California, and they drive 36 million internal combustion engines today. And in 2035, they're still going to drive 36 million internal combustion engines. Now, that number may not grow, but it's going to be significant. And we still only have 760,000 electric vehicles. So, pretty good at math. The gap's pretty big between 760,000 and 36 million. So it's gonna, and I don't say that because our industry doesn't support electric vehicles. We do. I have many of my members who are invested in certainly all renewables, wind and solar, and the electricity grid is no different. I have members who are involved in putting electric charging stations in California. So we're in all the energy strategies. That's not the issue, but it's going to take a while. It is going to take a while, and it's going to take longer than people envision because it's complicated. The infrastructure is not there. The cost of electric vehicles is still not comparable. Will it be? Sure, one day it will, but it isn't quite there yet. And people are still a little afraid of range anxiety. And when you look at the data, it wasn't electric vehicle sales that were up, it was SUVs.
Right.
Now, some SUVs are coming on as electric. That's exciting, right? That's a new technology, but it's still, the gap is pretty big. And so when you look at the governor's executive order, and it was broad, it wasn't just on, looking at the sale of internal combustion engines in 2035. It also had some really significant things on the production side that were troubling. There were, pushes toward banning hydraulic fracturing and cyclic steam generation, or cyclic steam well stimulation. These are both types of well stimulation. What does that mean? That means to get oil out of the ground, you got to help it. You got to heat it up a little bit because it's pretty heavy oil in California that we have. We're blessed with the resource, but it's a little tough to get it up because it looks like molasses. It takes a little heating, get it to flow, move it to the surface. So if we only make 30% of the crude oil we need, and why do you need crude oil? Turn it into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And so if we don't make it here, and we're blessed to have 30% of it, but if we don't make it here, where does it come from tomorrow? We still need to provide 36 million vehicles with fuel. The only other place it comes from is foreign sources. These foreign sources do not share our values. They don't have the environmental restrictions and tight regulations that California has. And so as I get in this conversation to the question you asked, I always talk to people about, look at tomorrow, we still got to figure this out. We still got to supply a lot of fuel to a lot of people. That has to come from somewhere. Even as we're transitioning and that demand goes down and other renewables come in, it's still a lot. California is the third largest consuming entity in the world on transportation fuels. The only two that are in front of us are China and the United States of America. So that just gives you a sense. We burn a lot of fuel because we have a lot of people who like to drive around. Now, it is down, obviously, but that being said, it's still a lot. So the transition isn't something that makes me nervous. As I've said this is my 40th year in the industry, and 31 of those years has been with the Western States Petroleum Association. So it doesn't bother me to look at that transition because, frankly, we've been in transition since the horse and buggy, as I've said. We obviously have made great progress in transportation since then, and we will continue to. Two of my members, I'm sure you know this year that you've heard of in the Bay Area, Marathon and Phillips 66. I mean, look at that. They took traditional oil and gas refineries and announced changing them into renewable diesel and renewable natural gas. And that just means you're making transportation fuels from something that isn't petroleum based. That's amazing.
Right.
That's amazing. And I launched an innovation initiative for our members a year and a half ago, because as I started really getting to look at what they were doing in this space, it's incredible. If you go on our website, I've cataloged all of the wonderful things that they're doing. And it blows my mind, frankly, how innovative and creative they are in all of the energy sources as we go forward. Because why? They've got their eye on the future, right? They're looking at the future. We respond to the consumer behavior, right? We deliver energy that the consumer demands. The consumer views change, we change with them, right? That's what we've done for centuries. And so I think the transition in the future is an exciting one. It's going to take longer than I think some people think or would like. Doesn't mean that some policies can't advance it quicker. But again, we still got to make sure that those people in the state that need to move around, that need energy, can do it affordably. I think most of the polling I've seen lately, affordability is high on people's list right now. Obviously, because of the pandemic. It was even before the pandemic, and now it really is. So, we got to make sure this path is affordable and that it really reaches all of the energy needs that we need as we go into the future. And I do think it'll be a sustainable energy future as we go down that path.
Something interesting you just noted about is kind of these alternative fuels or these kind of green fuels that are being produced. I guess, is that a viable answer to some of these questions about, this green future? Is that going to be a main part, in your opinion, of, moving forward kind of with, off of petroleum-based products and into these alternative fuels, I guess, extending the life of these internal combustion engines?
Yeah, good question. And first I'd say, I always look at the facts and the data, and the Energy Information Association, the administration for all of projections under the Department of Energy for these types of things, they still look out and say traditional oil and natural gas will supply 62% of our needs up until 2040. 62%. I mean,
Wow.
that's significant, right?
Right.
And so I look at that and I say, okay, so now it used to be 90. So it's a transition, definitely, but that's a lot still. So as we look forward, yes, I do believe renewables and alternatives are viable in this space, absolutely. And our members do too, and they're invested in them. But again, that transition, that balance, as you go forward and transition, you have to keep supplying that which people need. And up until 2040, it's still going to be traditional oil and gas as that transition is occurring. 2050, 2060, 2070, those numbers will be less and renewables and alternatives will be more. That's a natural progression. So I do think it's a viable alternative, but I do think too, we have to be careful about the electricity grid and what can it, how much can it take on as we make these transitions? Because if we're going to electrify the entire transportation system, We haven't even started really in any great terms on that. And we already faced rolling blackouts. So we've got to do this smart. One thing I've, in all the years, I always say when we make our best environmental progress is when the economy is strong. And when we get ourselves too ahead of making sure we can make these changes affordably, it puts some of these programs at risk. And I'd hate to say that, because I have a lot of respect for the environmental side of this equation as much as I do the economic side. And so I do believe that is a balance that has to occur at the right time, based on the right data, based on consumer behavior, based on affordability. And the most important thing is at scale. Many of these things are not at scale yet to be able to, you can't flip the switch tomorrow for sure on making this transition. So I know that's a lot, and I don't mean to sound pessimistic at all. I'm actually quite optimistic, and I'm very optimistic because of the industry itself, and just again how problem solving is in their DNA. So I know collectively we're all going to figure this out. All of us are going to figure this out. And I always say that no one has the corner on wisdom. And so this is going to be everybody coming together to make this happen. And it'll be a challenge for all of us.
You just earlier mentioned kind of, in that executive order, he also kind of mentioned kind of like a quasi fracking ban, but then I guess kind of called upon the legislature kind of further to kind of introduce their own type of fracking ban. Kind of, I guess, what's going on, this session, or what do you anticipate to see kind of on some sort of fracking ban here in California?
Yeah, and the one that the governor called for was a ban by 2024. And when he announced that, he stated that oil production from hydraulic fracturing in the state was, I think he said 2% of the total. But when you look at the government funded research on this and the independent analysis that has been done on hydraulic fracturing in the state, it really accounts for 17 to 20% of the oil production. So it's not insignificant, it's significant. And I don't know if you recall, but there was a bill passed several years ago, SB4 by Fran Pavley, and it was on hydraulic fracturing projects that have to go through a very rigorous process, probably the most rigorous process in the world. And keep in mind, there's been many independent studies on hydraulic fracturing in California. None have found any issues associated with it. And that's been since 1960, so which is when we really started doing it. And what it is it's a technique of taking high pressure steam into the ground and fracturing rocks to get oil out. These fractures in rocks are the size of a number 3 pencil head. Okay, so as we talk about this process, lots of times I think it's villainized in the sense that many people still have, not many, but there are people who have an opinion that all oil should stay in the ground. And unfortunately, that's some of the rhetoric that I hear around hydraulic fracturing, which is simply not true. Now, I'm not saying that perhaps they just, we've done a lousy job of educating people on the process. They probably have those feelings because they don't know. But it is a substantial economic driver in this region. We've done so many studies on it under SB4. It is the most rigorous analysis on any process that I've ever seen. And it is a substantial economic driver in Kern County. And again, if we don't produce the 30 to 40% of oil we have here, we have to get it from foreign imports. And what do we get for that? Less good paying jobs, less taxes to the local state government, not doing it, taking it from places that don't have the environmental standards we do, more greenhouse gases because you're putting it on a marine tanker and shipping it, lots of miles across the ocean to get it here. So I just, as I unpeel that onion, to me, it makes sense to produce it here safely in California. We could produce more of it if the government and policies would allow. And that would just, again, help in the transition forward, do it safely, do it under the strictest environmental regulations as we're transitioning to a lower carbon economy.
I guess harkening back to 2008 when we had the big, spike in oil prices, there's a lot of fear, a lot of talk about something called like peak oil, were we running out, and kind of fracking came out, and it seemed to kind of be like this hero, and it seemed to, come out just at the right time and, kind of reinvigorate the American oil supply. Can you kind of give us a little more in-depth talk about, I guess what a game changer fracking has been in the last 15 years?
The real game changer is what it does, right? It in most of the nation, it has resulted in a natural gas renaissance, right? And natural gas is the single most, it's really the single most thing we've done to reduce climate change. I don't care if you look at any IPC report, any of the, the conferences that have been going on worldwide on climate change, natural gas has been the most important thing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, reason people don't particularly like natural gas, that are opposed to it, are because it's still a fossil fuel. It's not petroleum based, but it's a fossil fuel. And those that want to eliminate fossil fuel, therefore don't like natural gas. That doesn't even equate with, I don't even understand that logic because
Right.
it is the cleanest, cheapest, abundant source we have. And the rest of the world clamors for it. And in California, we have a particular policy that doesn't particularly promote it. In fact, most of the policies I've seen from the California Air Resources Board do not promote natural gas at all, because they've chosen electricity as the single technology to go forward. In my opinion, that's short-sighted. It should include all technologies. I think a single technology leaves innovation on the table, leaves all of the things we're talking about that could be occurring today if we leapfrog over all of those. And so I just think, hydraulic fracturing was a game changer in the sense for the rest of the nation and world from a natural gas standpoint. For California, we have much more oil than we have natural gas. We have what's called associated gas. It's gas that comes up with the oil. And so when we hydraulically fracture for oil, we have a benefit of getting some natural gas with it, but we get much more oil than we do natural gas in California. Not the same for the rest of the nation, but it's a game changer. And I think that and cyclic steams is also a game changer. And why is that? Because it gets harder and harder to get the oil moving to the surface. It gets harder and harder to find it. But your question on peak oil, I want you to know I've been through, I can't even count how many peak oil scenarios in 40 years. And it's always peak oil. It's always peak oil. And then it's not peak oil.
Right.
And so we're not any close to peak oil. Let me just be clear. It's not an issue of being, out of oil. It's an issue of how are we going to go forward? How are we going to make sure we do it safely? And again, as I said, I think the all of the above energy strategy is the right approach to make sure we can meet these goals that California wants to achieve. And we're not against the goals. I mean, our industry and our association jumped in and supported the most aggressive cap and trade program on climate change ever. And we were right there. We were right there supporting it. And people were I think a little taken back. And the reason is those that understand cap and trade, the cap is for the environmental side and the trade is for business. The trade allows business to have flexibility to meet really tough goals. That's why businesses prefer cap and trade, because you still got all the environmental improvements you're going to get from the cap, but you're allowed some flexibility in how you go about it. And that's where you can get some cost savings because you have choices. So, we understand. I think earlier your question on climate change, it's extremely important issue for us. We're putting a lot of time and effort into how do we engage in a lower carbon economy. If it's through, making our fuels less carbon intensive by let's take gasoline, by putting more ethanol in our gasoline. We're at the maximum capacity the state allows right now. That reduces its carbon intensity. That's a better product for the environment. Renewable diesel, renewable natural gas, the same thing, much less carbon intensity than just natural gas or diesel. So all of these are improvements. They're all great strides towards meeting these objectives. And then you're bringing on wind, you're bringing on solar, you're bringing on renewables and alternatives as you're transitioning, and still supplying the best source of fuel you can for today, tomorrow, and frankly, for the foreseeable future.
And I think it's an interesting point you brought up is, the future of a zero, oil-based economy is not happening tomorrow. It's going to take a transition time of, 20, 30 years. Why is there so much resistance to, I guess, some of these things you're suggesting, such as natural gas, or these alternative fuels to, I guess, helping bridge to bring us there. They're even, banning natural gas in, new homes. So kind of why is there the resistance to this? Since it is clean burning and, it is an immediate thing that can help lower greenhouse gas emissions.
I think the best answer is probably ideology. I really think it's ideology, because when you, again, and I engage a lot with my friends in the environmental community and the environmental justice community. My degree is in the environmental side, natural resource management, so it's where I come from. So I understand the concerns they express, but as I have the conversation with them and keep probing and peeling that onion, we get to a better place because of the understanding we both gain from each other. And some of that resistance comes from, frankly, just not knowing, and frankly, I think we've not done a great job in the past of educating. We're doing a lot better job now, but in the past, maybe not so much. So some of those ideas that they have comes from not understanding necessarily what this industry does and what we're about and what we do. And every time I take legislators out, or any kind of environmental group or public out to the sites of production or refining, they are frankly amazed. They come back with a very different opinion than what they thought or what they read. And so those that say keep oil in the ground and don't produce it, my answer to that is, so what do you do tomorrow? I mean, we only got 760,000 electric vehicles. People just stop, their lives just end. I mean, society would stop if we didn't do what we do right now every day until we figure this out. And so, can we go to a lower carbon economy? Absolutely. Are there new technologies that are being employed to get there? Yes. Are we involved and invested in all of them? You bet. And why wouldn't we be? We know what the future is. Nobody has a crystal ball, but as you look forward, you know where the states are going, you know where their policies are, you see changing behaviors, you look at the trends, you look forward at what that path and trajectory looks like. You look forward at, well, when do you think storage is actually going to come online that allows these transitions to take place? When are electric vehicles going to be at scale such that one could make a transition in this magnitude? Those are all very legitimate questions, and I have no problem in that conversation. The only problem I have is in bans, which I think are always a bad policy because they don't usually look at facts and science. And so I just, my only answer is ideology, because when I look at the facts, the path is not unclear. The technology is not unclear. How we go about it is not unclear. So we should just all start doing it together and doing it in a way that's affordable and practical and doesn't have some of these unintended consequences. I mean, if you forced electric vehicles on people tomorrow, half of the state couldn't even afford them. They're still driving their trucks from before that they don't want to give up because
Right.
they either like them or they can't afford them. So it's just not as easy. I'll give you one funny story though, Jared, because it's hilarious. I have 12 nieces and nephews, and they're all between 20 and 32. That's like my own focus group. And so I often ask them,
Your own
well,
millennials to test
yeah,
on.
they're all millennials, right? So it's great. I can always have these calls with them.
Yeah.
And I say, well, I'm telling them all this stuff about transportation fuels and, the changing, where we're going on the transportation side. And they look at me, they go, well, Kath, we don't even want to have a car.
Hmm.
And so it's just this reality of, oh, well, there you go.
Solves all the
So
problems.
yeah, so well, yeah, there you go, solves all the problems. So but it is, consumer behavior is really important. And again, I just have to emphasize affordability. And I think also it's in this industry, we provide 150,000 direct jobs. We've got 350,000 indirect jobs. These are all very well paying jobs, way above the state average. And so when people talk about the just transition, well, we'll just keep oil in the ground, we won't make gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, and we'll just transition all these jobs to something else. It's really hard to tell someone to give up their career at a quarter of the pay and be happy about it. There's just nothing just transition about that.
Right.
And the other thing I say is we are training our workforce to deal with the changes of the future, right? As we change the workforce to train them to do that. Marathon and Phillips 66 are training their people to go from a traditional oil and gas facility to a renewable, diesel and natural gas. So that's going to be part of it. That's going to be part of the process, but they don't have to give up their careers to do that. They don't have to change from making liquid fuels, and we'll be with liquid fuels for a long time, to go put solar panels on people's roofs. So it's an interesting conversation. And I do think that the more we talk about it, I mean, I've seen now 125 cities who have taken a balanced energy policy ordinance to not ban natural gas hookups in residential and commercial. So it's not everybody who takes that stand and does that. Those that look at it say, no, I think consumer choice is still valuable, and natural gas is extremely clean. So why do we have to force a one single technology on everything? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, like cooks out there are very concerned. So.
Oh, I really love the chefs. I love the chefs. They're the most passionate and vocal about natural gas.
No, we like our high heat. You know, we always think about oil, and transportation, but it actually has many, different uses. Plastics, pharmaceuticals, agricultural. Are there other aspects other than just transportation that you guys are looking at and working on?
Yes, thank you for that. Big time. The petrochemical side is huge for the industry. And when you think about it, there's nothing that we do or hold or use every single day that doesn't rely on petroleum. You and I wouldn't be on this Zoom call. We wouldn't have a computer. We wouldn't have our cell phones. I think people sometimes don't understand that side. They focus all on the transportation side. And so that side is very, very important. My friends in the electric vehicle industry, I always say, what would an electric vehicle be without petroleum? Nothing. You wouldn't have a car. So we are in it together, right? And the products that we make are very, very important. And that's a big part of what we do. And as you know, it's in all the medical supplies that we talk about today. It's in it's how you make respirators, it's how you make artificial legs, and how you make everything comes from petroleum. So it is, it's going to be an industry that's going to be around for a very, very long time. And as I say, it's not if we're going to have a role in the future, it's what role are we going to have, and how are we transitioning ourselves to accommodate where we're going to the lower carbon economy, and how are we diversifying, and how are we changing, and what are we doing to make sure that we're part of that transition going forward? Because I know this industry will be very much a part of it.
With a new session here coming up in 2021, what are the issues that you're expecting to tackle this year and are preparing for?
Yeah, I think, we talked a little bit about them, the hydraulic fracturing ban, the cyclic steam ban. The other one is setbacks. You may have heard Assemblyman Maricsucci last year, I think it was AB 345, tried to leapfrog an existing regulation that CalGEM, the entity, used to be Division of Oil and Gas, now CalGEM, is the entity, the regulatory agency that regulates the oil and gas side on the production side. And they have a thorough science and regulatory program going on looking at setbacks as we speak. The bill just leapfrogged all of that and said, we're going to have a setback of, 2,500 feet or an arbitrary, number that wasn't studied. And that it was important to note that if that law would have passed, 70% of the crude oil or a large part of it would have been impacted. And again, if you do that, if you make that decision, it's okay. You are saying you are going to have more marine tankers coming into the ports of LA and Long Beach and the Bay Area who are already impacted. And it's coming from, again, foreign sources, more global. So it's like, so is your plan really to increase, global emissions, carbon emissions, taking it from places that don't have our values and our strict environmental regulations, losing jobs in California, losing revenues for what? you still got to have crude oil tomorrow. So that's why some of these things you have to probe deeper. You have to ask the questions. They may seem meritorious on the surface. What's the big deal? Why
Right.
can't you just do a setback? Well, when you start looking at it and it eliminates a large portion of the production, it becomes a big deal. And it would be a big deal for the governor if he can't supply transportation fuel tomorrow while he figures out how to transition to the future. So those are big ones. The banning of internal combustion engines post 2035 is certainly a big one. Again, because I don't think banning anything is the answer. We're already transitioning without a ban into a different type of transportation system for the future. And so we don't need to take those kinds of measures, but we need to have a mix that gives, again, grid reliability, affordability, and really looks at cost and benefit as we go forward, because these aren't simple choices. And as I said, all energy has its issues. So those are some of the biggies.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting
And climate
perspective.
change. Climate change, of course, is
Right.
always a biggie.
Yeah, it kind of leads me to my next question is kind of what is your approach on climate change? And I think this year they said despite everyone staying home and not driving as much, we actually had a rise in greenhouse gas emissions. And I think something you just pointed to is when we look at a law and on its face, it might look valid, but I guess you got to take a look at the net picture. Having tankers coming in, different transportation, bringing it here, obviously takes more oil maybe than it does just to simply pull it out of the ground. So kind of, I guess, what is your association's overall approach on climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's always so funny between the debate on climate change and I was lucky enough to go to Madrid last year for COP25 and spoke on one important topic, which is carbon capture, use and sequestration.
You got to go somewhere last year?
I did. Well, not 2020, sorry,
Oh,
2019
okay.
when they had it. And then of course they canceled it for last year or this
Right.
year, last year. That's right. It is last year now. But in 2019, when they had the big conference in Madrid on climate change, I heard a lot of too much, too fast, too little, too slow. So there's this view, right, of those two sides. And again, it's such an important issue, but you've got to strike that balance of I always call the four E's, the environment, the economy, social equity, and then the right energy mix. That is really important in the climate change space, just as it is when we're looking at criteria pollutants. And so we approach it in things like, look, these are pretty aggressive goals. Cap and trade is a market mechanism. And there's two market mechanisms which we support, cap and trade or carbon tax. The only difference between the two are cap and trade, the environmental emission reductions and maybe not as much as the cost. Carbon tax, you definitely know the cost, but not quite as certain on the environmental reductions. And so there are two ways to get to the same thing. My members have different opinions on both, but we support market mechanisms, so we support both of those approaches. And then I think the biggest thing for climate change that we need to really think about for this state, because we're making great progress on our goals. The cap and trade program is certainly advancing in that area. The revenues that come from that program that are reinvested in some of the new technologies. So we are making very good progress. But carbon neutrality goals are carbon neutrality by 2045 as California's goal. That is a big hurdle. That's a very big hurdle. And Lawrence Livermore National Labs, who got a big grant from the Department of Energy, did a huge study in California on this. And their conclusion from their study was, we have no way of meeting these carbon neutrality goals, doing everything we're doing, if we don't do carbon capture and sequestration, if we don't take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it underground. And so one of the things we are particularly interested in, because who knows how to store stuff under the ground? This industry knows how to store stuff under the ground. So we know where the caverns are. They've been mapped through the state. We know how to capture it. We know how to store it. We know how to keep it there. And we have to do it to meet these goals. So
put it back where you found it.
And the new technology, which really is fascinating, is that which captures carbon not out of a stack, but out of the actual atmosphere and takes it and sequesters it. Now that is That's pretty wild when you think about that. I mean, we know how to take it off a stack, capture it, put it underground, and keep it there, but it's not going to be enough carbon to get to the goals that we need. And as you know, we're breathing CO2 in and out all the time, so we got a lot of carbon going around.
Right.
So if this new technology is fascinating to actually be able to capture, to take carbon out of just the atmosphere and sequester it. That one I think has great promise, and I can't wait to see where that goes, because actually it's gonna be what it takes. And I always wanted to research, re-level people or level set people for California's contribution to climate change. Remember, we are less than like a tenth of a percent of the world's climate change emissions. And so we're taking on a lot for that small contribution, because we want to be leaders, right? We want to show people what we're doing. But that's why affordability matters so much, because if we take too much on and we burden the consumer with too much cost for a little bit of benefit, we haven't really solved the global problem. And this is a global problem. It
Right.
isn't a California problem. So that's what makes climate change a little more challenging. Criteria pollutants, which impact our health and direct impact, ozone and SOx and nitrogen dioxide, those that impact our health, those are things we deal with in our backyard. The things we deal with in California that are really, really important. Climate change is very global in nature, and we're a very small part. So what we do has to really matter if we're going to have people follow us, and it's got to be affordable so that people just say, well, I'm not going to do that,
Right.
because all the polling says everyone thinks it's a great idea until the cost goes up significantly, and then they're not so sure. So that's where that balance comes in. That's where that is. So that's how we approach it. We know we're at a tipping point on how we produce, distribute, consume, and benefit from energy. We know that's where we're at, and we have to do this, in our opinion. I would say very intentionally, very mindful of the future, not accidentally, and not without full discussion by all the stakeholders as to what's at stake and how do we go down this path, either in transportation fuels, in climate change, in criteria pollutants, in all of these things that are super, super important. How are we going to do it without impacting negatively on the consumers and the communities that we all serve?
Climate change was one of the focus of, Governor Brown's administration. Can you kind of talk to how, I guess, different Governor Newsom's administration has been from Governor Brown's, and kind of, I guess the change in regulatory functions and kind of a new beginning here. How do you see things going in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think each one of them come to the job with a different philosophy and approach. Brown had decades of experience, and Governor Newsom is forging his path. I think in Brown's second term, he focused on a few issue areas, and Governor Newsom is working on many. I think the interaction with the legislature, Brown was probably more engaged with the legislative process, and Governor Newsom seems more interested in policy ideas that can be implemented by executive order or executive authority. I think Newsom probably faces obviously more uniqueness in the pandemic challenge than Brown did, but Brown had economic recovery after a recession, which played into policy. And governing during a deficit is certainly different. I think it's pretty different than governing during a budget surplus.
Yeah.
So I think both demonstrate commitment to the climate change and climate policy and disadvantaged communities. I think they both demonstrate commitment to that, and they have a shared appreciation of supply and demand for oil and the benefits of oil to the local economy, but different approaches to including industry in the conversation about the future and climate initiatives. I'd love to see Governor Newsom engage us more, because we have tremendous experience and expertise to be quite helpful. And I think, Brown never attempted to shut down a major part of our business, but instead supported strict regulations and long-term sustainable climate policy. So I'm hoping that Governor Newsom moves in that direction going forward.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. That was very informative. I guess anything else you'd like to get out there before we go?
I just really, I think we really do believe that it's imperative that we partner with the state and the local elected officials as well, and the community leaders to really make sure we've got the right impact on health and safety and economic opportunity and the environment. It's just so important that we're engaged. And I always say, if not us, then who? If we can set aside our political differences, we got to engage in the data and the facts and not the divisive rhetoric, and pool our resources, because I do believe that together it really is enough to shift the future. So I'm excited about that, and I'm really excited about this discussion, Jared. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, that definitely fascinating getting your perspective, and it's very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take
All right.
care.
Thanks,
Be
Kath.
safe.
Some are called dreamers,